morning we are here to talk about how to use writing skills that you have to really be sure that you have this effective portfolio that's going to get you that pass on the edTPA that you all want. So we are going to focus on three main things. We're going to focus on analytical writing, we're going to focus on argumentation, and we're going to focus on organization. As you can see in those handouts, I've got some examples from a successful edTPA exam that we're going to take a look at pretty closely and figure out, okay, based on this successful example, based on this excerpt of writing, what do we see going on in terms of analysis? What do we see going on in terms of argument? What do we see going on in terms of organization? So we're going to work with these examples and really define these writing skills and use them, you all will use them to apply to your edTPA exam. So that's the plan for today. We're going to spend about half an hour on each of those three skills with some time built in for that small group work that I'm talking about. And then by 11:30, the Writing Center portion of your workday will be wrapped up, and I'll tell you a little bit about how to stay in touch with us, and I have a brief evaluation for you all to fill out about the Writing Center workshop. So that's the plan. Any questions before we get started? Excellent. Okay, so let's jump right in. So why the edTPA? Why do you have to do this? What is the purpose of doing all of this work, having a giant portfolio, gathering all this evidence? Why do you have to do it?
Because it shows your ability to plan, but also able to reflect and write about what you did.
Okay, so planning, reflection, writing, right? All necessary skills as a teacher. Why else do you have to do this? Yeah.
Supporting what you're teaching.
Supporting what you're teaching? Say more about what you mean by supporting.
Finding evidence of why you're teaching what you're teaching students and
Okay, so why is evidence important? Yeah.
Evidence is important because we need to have something concrete to look at to see how we can make improvements, where changes might be needed, where the students might not have actually gotten the material. We'll have something concrete to refer back to and then be able to plan our next level of instruction for them to support them so that they can get the content better.
Absolutely. So this evidence that you're gathering is important so that you can use it as an assessment measure, right? What does that A stand for in edTPA? Assessment, exactly. So you're doing this as a way to assess your teaching. And as you said, that doesn't mean that the answer is, my teaching is perfect. You know, sometimes that means, hey, this didn't land exactly the way I wanted it to. So, you know, what can I do differently? How can I change it? But this evidence-based practice that you all are engaging in and that you all have to document in the edTPA is about assessing the effectiveness of your teaching. So that's why you have to do this. And yes, it's laborious. Yes, it's something that you have to do to be certified. But really, that larger, big picture purpose is about assessing your teaching. And I think that's something that as educators, you all can buy into, right? It's important that we have that concrete evidence to show how effective I am as a teacher. I want that evidence so that I can be as effective as possible. So that's what we're doing here, right? We're assessing the teaching using edTPA as a tool. So if we understand that, then my next question for you is, well, what does the edTPA prove? What does it communicate? You get the pass, you know, you passed edTPA.
That you're an effective teacher.
That you're an effective teacher, absolutely. So the communication, if we think of the edTPA as a piece of writing that communicates something, this is what it communicates, right? My teaching meets all content-specific and state standards, right? That's your argument. That's what the edTPA communicates. I'm a good teacher. I'm an effective teacher. I've got this. So if every single edTPA exam or portfolio communicates this message, and if you think about your audience, the scorers of the edTPA, it's pretty clear that they're not really looking for this answer, right? Because every single exam has the same answer: I'm an effective teacher. So if we're not looking for the answer, I'm an effective teacher, what are we looking for in the edTPA? What determines whether or not you're going to get that pass? Yeah?
Like whether you can meet all of the things that they ask you to do, the planning, the implementing, and the reflecting, and not only saying like, yes, I did it good, but also reflecting that sometimes you do mess up, sometimes things don't go according to plan, so you have to reflect and then figure out what you're going to do next time to do it better.
Yeah, and how do you do that reflection? How do you show that for anybody? Say it again.
You have to look at your evidence.
And what do you do when you're looking at your evidence? What do you do with it?
It's almost like you're analyzing.
You're analyzing it, absolutely. So your edTPA exams, every single one of you, so like if you think back to kind of more traditional academic essays that you've written, your essay always has a thesis statement, right? So the thesis statement for the edTPA is right here. My teaching meets all content-specific and state standards. Everybody's got your thesis. You all have the same thesis. So it's not as though through this process you're looking to find the conclusion. You already have it. I'm an effective teacher. What you're looking for in the edTPA is how you're an effective teacher, and that's about analysis. So your goal in writing this portfolio is how do you analyze the teaching that you've done in order to prove this thesis. Is this making sense? Yeah? All right, so now that we've got this, let's talk about that analysis. What do I mean when I say analysis? As educators, as academics, analysis is a word that we tend to take for granted. We throw it around. We talk about analyzing text. We talk about analyzing films. But analysis has a technical definition. And the technical definition of analysis is to take a whole, break that whole down into its component parts, and assess, interpret, or evaluate those parts. So we've already established that some of the component parts are evidence from your lessons, right? So teaching tools that you've invented, adapted, lessons that you've designed that have specific objectives, those are some of the component parts, right? But now we need to analyze, assess, interpret, evaluate those parts in order to get to that proving of how you're an effective teacher. So this is the work that you're going to engage in right away, task 1 in the edTPA. So if you would find that handout that you have at your table on analytical writing. So task 1, the central focus. Describe the central focus and purpose for the content you will teach in the learning segment. So here, for task 1, the whole is your central focus. And you're going to take your central focus and break it down into component parts in order to engage in this work of analysis. So what I would like to do is read this sample writing, and again, this is from a successful edTPA exam. Would somebody volunteer to just read this paragraph out loud? Thank you.
The central focus I will be teaching in the learning segment is persuasive writing. Persuasive writing is a type of writing that tries to convince the reader of an opinion or belief. Students will use various short passages in a graphic organizer to practice persuasive writing and become more developed writers, because the students will recognize the need to give multiple examples and supporting details in writing. Students will use their prior knowledge on writing sentence structure and conventions to complete writing tasks. The purpose of this learning segment is for students to be able to address all components needed when writing a persuasive piece with the purpose of convincing someone. Throughout this learning segment, students will be exposed to various persuasive prompts where they will need to pick a side or point of view that they support. They will learn the concept of persuasive writing through these prompts, short passages, group work, review questions, and graphic organizers.
you. So what is the central focus in this example? Persuasive writing, right? We get that told to us explicitly in the first sentence. What are some of the pieces of evidence, some of the component parts that are highlighted in this paragraph?
She talks about what the kids are going to include in their writing and also the things she's going to include to show what she's doing for each segment.
And can you name a couple of the things that she includes?
She's talking about the prompts and the short passages and how she's going to split them into smaller groups and things like that.
Okay, so this last sentence, right? These prompts, short passages, group work, review questions, graphic organizers. So what are those? Evidence, but I mean, what are they kind of practically? I mean, those are not your learning objectives per se, right? Graphic organizers. How would you use a graphic organizer? Say it again. The tools, absolutely. So if you take a look at this little hierarchical chart that you have on your handout, we've got that central focus as the whole. And I think this writing sample does a nice job of providing the third tier where you see I've put in Oreo graphic organizer, etc. Those teaching tools are mentioned explicitly in the writing. Prompts, passages, group work, review questions, graphic organizers. So we've got this broken down, the persuasive writing, and we've got these component parts of the tools. This sample, I think, could do a little bit of a better job of giving us that middle tier. And you see I've got supporting an argument with evidence, right? That's sort of the lesson goal, the objective, the learning outcome. Identifying audience, purpose, and voice. Writing a persuasive letter with guided assistance. Writing a persuasive letter, right? Those are the intermediary goals. We're going to get these tools, use them to help students meet these goals. These goals then achieve the central focus. Does this make sense organizationally in your brain? So, because I've seen the whole sample exam that this comes from, this student, these were her intermediary goals. They were in all of her materials that she uploaded and attached to her edTPA exam. So even though this paragraph, I think, could do a little bit of a better job of mentioning them, she did have them in her lesson. And so here, you can see also, you can take some of the pressure off of yourself in the edTPA. It doesn't have to be perfect. This was still a very successful exam, and that material was there.
So you would upload the review questions and graphic organizers along with that?
In this exam that I saw, the materials were there.
Okay.
Yes, I'm getting a yes from the back of the room.
Your instructional materials need to be task one. Okay.
So what I want you to do now is to start thinking about what is your central focus. What is the lesson, persuasive writing? Persuasive writing is not what you teach every day, all day, all of spring semester. You're doing many different things this semester, but what is the one thing that you're going to focus on for task 1 of the edTPA that then you can break down into, these different learning outcomes? Those learning outcomes that you can break down again into the specific tools and evidence that you're using in the classroom. So this is the goal for our first small group breakout session, is to really identify what is your whole, what is that central focus, and what are all of the component parts. So identify your central focus. Break it down into its component parts, its lessons or learning outcomes, and their tools. You're going to share that in your small groups. Do the objectives meet the goals of the lesson? Do the lessons accomplish the central focus? So we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into argumentation, but you want to be sure that your lessons or your learning outcomes really do achieve the thing that you name in your central focus, right? It can't be random or arbitrary. All of it has to make sense logically. You've got to be sure that that graphic organizer that you're uploading is actually helping them develop voice, and that developing voice is actually helping them, work towards this skill of persuasive writing. So think logically, right? What's the one thing that you're focusing on? What are the cascading goals that come off of that? How do you break those goals down into the things that you're doing every day in the classroom? So is everyone clear on what you're doing in these next 15 minutes or so? Okay. I don't know how well you can see on the screen. Up here, again, that top square says central focus. That middle tier are all the lessons, and then the bottom tier is evidence from your lessons. So those teaching tools that you're using in the classroom. Okay, so I'm going to give everybody about 15 minutes to start working on this. Again, you've got student teaching supervisors or writing center tutors at your tables, so they are there to help facilitate your thinking about this. You can run ideas by them as well in terms of, hey, does this make sense logically? Does this cascade appropriately? Can I fill in my chart? So go ahead and start doing that. All right, everyone, let's bring this back to the larger group. So what are some of your central foci? What are some of the things that you all know you're going to focus on today? Yeah.
I want to focus on summarizing.
Summarizing, right? Another one from someone else? Opinion writing. Characterization, yeah.
Text structure, nonfiction text. Text structure.
Text structure in nonfiction. Great. One from this table.
Composing a persuasive letter.
A persuasive letter. All right. So you have a larger central focus that then you've broken down into its component parts, right? So that's step one of analysis. Take that whole, break it down into its component parts. So next comes the evaluation, assessment, interpretation of those parts, right? Thinking back to that technical definition of analysis. So it's not enough to just say, here's my central focus, here's all the lessons I've designed to achieve that central focus, here's all the tools, right? That's only step one of analysis. Step two is doing that assessment, that analysis, assessment, interpretation, evaluation, right? All of those things that are going to enable you to prove through the analysis that you're an effective teacher. So now that we are all experts on analytical writing, right, taking those two steps, I'm going to raise the bar and take you all through advanced analytical writing. This is something that the edTPA asks you to do as well. So you can see we've got our hierarchical chart down here in the bottom right. That's our central focus and all of its component parts. And in order to analyze it, we've got to look at it, right? So we're examining it closely with this magnifying glass. Well, advanced analytical writing is switching out the lens of that magnifying glass and looking at it through different lenses. So, for example, in the edTPA, you might look at your central focus and its component parts through the lens of state standards. When I evaluate this through the lens of state standards, what do I get? Am I an effective teacher? When I evaluate this through the lens of the student's cultural knowledge, what do I get? Am I an effective teacher? When I evaluate this through the lens of theoretical constructs, right, education scholarship, what do I get? Am I an effective teacher? And of course, again, you all already know the answer, right? The answer has to be, yes, my teaching is effective, I meet all the standards. But it's this work of examining, evaluating, interpreting your component parts through these different lenses that's going to prove it. You've got to show how you're an effective teacher. Okay? So these are the exact things that come up later in task one, right? You have to talk about your students' cultural knowledge. You're prompted to do so. You have to talk about the state standards and show how you are implementing them and sort of bringing them to life through your teaching. So this too is analytical writing, looking at all those component parts through a particular lens. And you'll see when you look forward, to the edTPA, through the edTPA, the lenses are going to be given to you, and you just have to do the work of doing the evaluation through the lens. Does this make sense? Okay. All right. So let's now move on and talk about argumentation and see how argumentation and analysis sort of work together. So please pull your argumentation example handout. Just like analysis has a technical definition, argumentation also has a technical definition. And as a writing teacher, this is a pet peeve of mine because we tend to throw the word argument around. Well, what's your argument? What's your claim? What's your thesis? What's your central focus even, right? But an argument and a thesis statement are not synonymous. They are two different things. An argument, by definition, is a claim supported by evidence. Claim and thesis are synonymous, right? The thesis is the articulation of your idea. It's your conclusion. It's your answer. I'm an effective teacher is our claim, right? But it's not an argument unless it's also supported by evidence. So here, coming back to this evidence-based practice thing, right? You can't just say, I'm an effective teacher. You have to prove that you're an effective teacher by providing evidence, having that support from your classes. So it's really important that we understand this if we're going to talk about argumentation. A claim is only one piece of an argument. I often like to represent this mathematically. So a claim or a thesis plus the evidence equals the argument. If you don't have both components, you don't have an argument. Okay? So now that we get this, let's go ahead and take a look at this sample writing. Again, can I have a volunteer to read this paragraph? Yeah, please.
Given the central focus of persuasive writing, the standards and learning objectives within my learning segment address the essential literacy strategy of using evidence to support an argument. Throughout the learning segment, the standards make sure to address this essential literacy strategy. For example, in lessons 1 through 3 of the New York State P through 12 Common Core Learning Standards for ELA and Literacy for Reading Standards for Informational Text K through 5, states that the student explains how an author uses reasons and evidence to support particular points in a text, identifying which reasons and evidence support which points. The standard is addressed in the learning segment when having the students read short passages on a persuasive topic or debate, and then having to identify the reasons and examples the author has given supporting his or her opinion on a topic, using a graphic organizer to do so.
Great, thank you. So, to backtrack a second, I just told you that those different lenses are going to be dictated to you by the edTPA. So here, when you look at central focus, question B, given the central focus, describe how the standards and learning objectives within your learning segment address one, an essential literacy strategy. That is what's dictating your claim here, right? Just to be really transparent with everybody. So the reason that we're getting this claim that says, my learning segment addresses the essential literacy strategy of using evidence to support a claim, we're getting that from the prompt. The prompt is explicitly dictating what the claim of this writing should be. So again, the same approach, the claims we know, right? The thesis we know, the conclusion we know, I meet standards, I have the essential literacy strategy, I'm an effective teacher. It's about the how, the analysis that we're focusing on here. So you can see in my track changes comments on here, right away, if we're looking at this paragraph as an argument, we get the claim in the first sentence. My lesson uses the essential literacy strategy of using evidence to support an argument. That is the claim in this argument, right? That's our thesis. Scanning down the paragraph a little bit to my next little balloon, you see I say evidence proving this is indeed a standard. So putting in the New York State Common Core information is serving as evidence in this argument. It's saying, okay, here's an essential literacy strategy. I know what I'm doing. This is an essential literacy strategy. Here, let me point you to where it comes from. That's giving you more credibility, showing that you know how this evidence and claim works together. And then you keep going. Evidence proving my lesson meets the standard. The author has given support for his or her opinion on a topic, right? Again, this is about persuasive writing as an essential literacy strategy. Everything matches up. I'm giving you the claim, the evidence from the Common Core, the evidence from my classroom, and then we also get evidence of the tool, using a graphic organizer to do so. So we have 3 different kinds of support of evidence from the Common Core, from the learning outcomes, and from the tool that you've used, all to support this claim of using evidence to support an argument being an essential literacy strategy, which is the thing you were asked to reflect about. So does that make sense, how all of this kind of accordions in on itself? It's all scaffolded in, and all of the evidence works together to support that claim? Yeah? You all know how to do this. You're experts at this as students and apprentice scholars, right? This is not a new skill, but because it's packaged in the edTPA, which is kind of a high-stakes portfolio, it feels much scarier than it really is. You have the skills to do this. You know how to write arguments. You know that evidence supporting a claim is what makes an argument. So now it's just a matter of really zooming in on that mapping that you've just done and saying, okay, what are the tools that support the learning outcomes that are in line with the standards that prove that I'm an effective teacher? It's like showing your work in algebra, right? You don't get the credit if you just copy the answer out of the back of the book. You've got to show your work and show all the math that you've done. It's really the same when it comes to this kind of argumentation. Any questions about argument? Yes?
I'm reflecting some of the questions that the students have been asking me and some of my other student teacher advising. Most of them, what I'm hearing is, let me try to rephrase it. It sounds as if the main focus is on the ELA standards, but the number of the students, both whom I have and some here at the table I don't have, they're using, let's say, social studies in order to teach the ELA standards of opinion or persuasive writing or argue or who, what, where, when, why.
Mm-hmm.
So I was saying, well, when you're writing it up, you really don't have to include standards for the ELA and standards for the, let's say, social studies component that they're using to teach that skill. But what I'm hearing you say is the main focus on the central focus when they're writing all of this up and presenting it should be the ELA standard that they have isolated that they're teaching, and the social studies or science, whatever the second content area is that they're using to teach that skill, is really very secondary. It's really the focus, when they're writing it up, it's really the focus on the main ELA standard. Is that correct?
I think so, but jump in if I've got that wrong.
That's a question I've been getting from a number of people, and it came up here at the table with some of the students I don't know, but I don't know if I'm answering it correctly, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, we actually had a conversation over here because a lot of this group was doing science.
Okay.
A science learning segment.
Right.
So we were talking about how you can get caught up in the content if the kids understand the content of insects or states of matter.
Right.
But you really need to focus on what that essential literacy strategy.
Okay, that's my
And it must have the ELA literacy focus.
So it's a literacy focus, no matter what the content is they're using in order to teach that skill. Okay.
And I do also know, this is just one example from this is the childhood exam.
Yes.
Do I have that right? But for those of you in the secondary group, your exams are going to be slightly different with slightly different prompts. So, you don't see that reflected in my example that I have for the larger group, but you're going to follow what's dictated to you in your content-specific exam.
This is all child.
Yeah.
Right, so that would be the answer for the child's
Right,
group
right.
that are focusing on content.
Whereas the secondary was
Okay, you're over there. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I was like, I thought, but I'm not sure. So when you are looking at your exams, you also are going to have this little bulleted list with different things, and rather than being focused on the essential literacy strategy, you're going to be focused on the thing that the exam dictates to you. Yeah, you got it. You all are doing it right. All right, other questions about argument before we move back into some small group work? Okay, So, in these next 15 minutes or so, I want you to, okay, in the first breakout group, you just broke out your component parts, right? So now I want you to start this process of building your argument. And again, this is a mini argument, right? It's just the piece about the essential literacy strategy or whatever it is that your exam is dictating to you. So again, you know the claim. The claim is that your teaching meets both content-specific and state standards. In order to support this with evidence, first match one of your learning objectives with one state standard and one content-specific standard. Then use specific details from your corresponding lesson to prove yourself right. Share your arguments within your group, asking others for confirmation that your argument is sound. So again, this is about logic. You know, even if I am not an expert on, whatever science state standard that you're working on, I can sit there as an outside person and tell you, well, the logic here is unclear to me, or the logic doesn't hold up, or tell me more about what you mean when you say X. So you can definitely check for one another to be sure, as I said, the tool meets the objective supports the lesson supports the central focus. It all has to cascade and make logical sense. So I take the opportunity, sitting in the group together to double check one another's work to be sure that you're setting yourself up with this really strong foundation for task one. Okay, so I'll give you another 15 minutes or so to get into this argumentation. You're building claims. It's more simple than you thought, right? More, maybe?
It is a little simpler.
Right, because following that diagram, what are your tools, right? You can build that diagram from the bottom up if it's easier. What are the tools? We were just talking about journals, Venn diagrams, tree diagrams. Those are all the tools that are at the bottom of the chart. That's how you are accomplishing the teaching. What goals do those tools help you achieve? Compare, contrast, reflection, developing a voice. What is the central focus that those goals are achieving? Persuasive writing, reflective writing, whatever it is that you've identified as your central focus. The question came up again as I was walking around, well, what if in my Venn diagram I happen to be talking about the 3 stages of matter? That's fine, right? That just happens to be the example. But don't focus on distinguishing between the 3 stages of matter in your edTPA. Just let that be the example. That's the Venn diagram in action, right? The Venn diagram is the thing that you're focusing on as evidence of your skillful teaching. Make sense? Okay, so let's move on to the next step, which is organized paragraphs. So again, this is a review for all of you. You all know how to structure a strong paragraph. It has things like topic sentences. It defines its terms. There's one idea per paragraph. You, again, are including specific evidence from your lessons, and that has to do with idea development, right? Fully fleshing out your ideas on the page. And paragraphs usually end with a reiteration of the topic. So a link back to that topic sentence. So this is something, again, you all have got. You have this skill, this knowledge already because you're proficient writers as students. So again, applying this skill back to the edTPA, if you would find your paragraph organization example handout. And when we read it, you will see that it's the exact same paragraph that we just looked at when we were looking at argument. But let's go ahead and take the time to read this aloud again now that we've got our heads thinking about organization. So can I have a volunteer to read this one? Please.
Given the central focus of persuasive writing, the standards and learning objectives within my learning segment address the essential literacy strategy of using evidence to support an argument. Throughout the learning segment, the standards make sure to address this essential literacy strategy. For example, in lessons 1 through 3, the New York State P12 Common Core Learning Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy for Reading Standards for Informational Text K through 5 states that the student explains how an author uses reasons and evidence to support particular points in a text, identifying which reasons and evidence support which points. The standard is addressed in the learning segment when having the students read short passages on a persuasive topic or debate, and then having to identify the reasons and examples the author has given supporting his or her opinion on the topic, using a graphic organizer to do so. Also following the essential literacy strategy of supporting a claim with evidence in lessons 3 and 4 is the NYSCC writing standard.
Great, thank you. So again, we're getting the argument reiterated here, right? We've got the claim, we've got the evidence. But if you take a look at my comments this time, now I'm thinking about paragraph organization. So in that first sentence where a moment ago we were talking about, well, the claim is very clear, essential literacy strategy about using evidence to support an argument, I'm pointing to that same paragraph, but I'm saying, look how it's written. It's explicit, right? We're repeating the language of the prompt. There's no confusion about what the claim is. You know, you're not burying it in lots of fluff about what's happening in your classroom. You have a clear, direct, explicit topic sentence that reiterates the prompt. As a scorer, if you think about these poor scorers that are sitting in a room reading hundreds and hundreds of these, you don't want your scorer to be wondering, what is the prompt? Tell them in your topic sentence, this is the prompt. Don't make them go back and read through these bullets and try and have to figure out, are you talking about literacy strategies? Are you talking about reading, writing connections? Name it explicitly in your topic sentence so that your scorer has an easier time and is not frustrated with you as they're reading your portfolio. So clear topic sentence, explicit. If you scan down to my next little balloon, uses quotation to define the term essential literacy strategy. So when we were talking about argument, we were talking about this citation to the Common Core as evidence. And it is evidence, but it's serving double duty here. It's also doing the work of defining what you mean when you say essential literacy strategy. And the reason you do that is because you want the scorer to know that this is what an essential literacy strategy is. So you are proving that you are on the in crowd in this endeavor as a teacher. You know what this is, and I can prove to you what it is. Here's what it is. This is how I understand it. So you're defining terms, giving that contextualization right away. It's a good organizational strategy. Moving down to my next comment, provides evidence from the lessons, develops the paragraph's main idea. So again, we're back to this thing about evidence, having the evidence to prove that you are an effective teacher. Again, that evidence is serving double duty. And when we're talking about argument, it's helping build the argument, right, and a claim supported by evidence. But when we're talking organization of paragraphs, there's this thing, idea development. You need to be sure that you're totally transparent, that somebody who's not you, who's not the writer, who doesn't live in the world of context that you live in, can understand what you mean. And so idea development is fleshing out your idea on the page, getting it in words so that somebody who is an outsider perhaps can still access it. Evidence does that. So again, you're getting the double duty there. Now here we've got a new paragraph. And I say it links back to the topic sentence, which is the main idea, so readers don't lose track of the focus. So also following the essential literacy strategy of supporting a claim with evidence in lessons 3 and 4. So we're getting that reiteration at the start of the new paragraph to say, hang on, scorer, I'm not done talking about essential literacy strategies, so let me reiterate this to be sure that you're still with me. So again, as an organization strategy, you're checking in with your reader saying, are you still with me? I'm still talking about this. I don't want to lose you. So you're preventing your scorer from being confused, from being frustrated, from not really sure where you're going in your next movement here. So now, here is where things get a little bit tricky. So we've started a new paragraph. We know that one paragraph should be about one main idea, and yet this new paragraph is still talking about essential literacy strategies, which indeed is the main idea in the first paragraph. And yet, here we are breaking a new paragraph. So I'm breaking the rules. What's going on there? Well, what's going on there is, yes, we're still talking about essential literacy strategies, but we're moving from one standard to a different standard. So because our main idea about literacy strategies is so big, and we have multiple standards that we're pointing to, we're going to break by the standard instead of, by moving from essential literacy to requisite skills, so that it's a little bit easier on the reader. So we've got essential literacy and, this particular Common Core thing, and then we've got essential literacy and the next particular standard. And we're using that as a way to organize the ideas paragraph by paragraph. Yeah.
Do you know if when we're writing this, if each paragraph we should focus on the standards of the overall goal of the segment, or should we break it down into possibly like the one or two that vary in each of the lessons? Are we covering all of that, or just the main idea one?
So that is going to be dictated by a couple of things. So let me ask that question to the larger group. What is going to dictate that? The edTPA. What specifically in the edTPA? You got it. I know you've got it.
Yes, the video.
No. So what is it that you're responding to right here?
The prompt.
The prompt.
Okay.
Right? So if you're focused on talking about your essential literacy strategy, you want to stay focused on your essential literacy strategy. The other thing that's going to dictate that has to do with that chart that I'm asking you all to work on, right? So what is your central focus? If you say that your central focus is persuasive writing, and then suddenly you're talking about, integrating source material, as a scorer, I'm like, whoa, hold up, what does integrating source material have to do with persuasive writing? You veered off topic. So you want to stay focused, and paragraph by paragraph, keep it simple. Again, like the Oreo graphic organizer helps them support a claim with evidence that achieves the central focus of persuasive writing, and you've got the state standard. So you've only got like 4 things per paragraph. Keep it clean, keep it simple. Again, make sure that the logic holds up, the argument is there, it's transparently organized. That's what you want. Did I answer that question that you just asked? Okay. So can you see, in looking at this example, how the organization is working? Yeah? Can you see how the organization and the argumentation are complementary? Kind of?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And can you see how all of this is really based on having that foundation of the clear central focus, which is the whole that you've broken down into its component parts, and then you're working to evaluate, interpret, assess those parts. Yeah. So like 3 things are happening at once, but they are 3 distinct things that each kind of have their own way of being. Okay. Any questions before we move into our next breakout group? Okay. So your next breakout group is to write a paragraph. So I've been walking around and I see that you all are taking notes on the handouts and replacing our sample exams information with your own information, which is fantastic. So you should have some analysis that you've just done, right? You have a central focus, you've got it broken down, you're looking at what standards you're going to match it with so that you can look through that lens. Now that you have it mapped out, write one well-organized paragraph using the conventions listed on your handout. And there I'm talking about that list, topic sentence, defining your terms, all that good stuff. Then you're going to share your paragraphs with your group members and take suggestions for improving them. Again, you can use one another to be sure that the message is landing clearly. Put yourself in the seat of the scorer. Do you know what the prompt is that this exam is responding to? And share that perspective with one another so you can be sure that you've got it. Okay? All right, so take about another 15 minutes to work on these paragraphs. Stressed. Stressed. Tell me more. Why are you feeling stressed?
I I feel like the information that we're getting today, it would have been helpful to have this prior to actually executing some of the plans that we had. Because then it would have given us a little bit more information to help us write the lessons and be able to find out what our central focus on. For me personally, I know that that was my biggest issue, trying to figure out what my central focus was going to be. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be the content or the concept.
Yes.
And now that I know that it's the concept, I need to go back and change some of the lessons that I've planned because I have not had an opportunity to actually execute any of the lessons that I've planned.
Right.
So now I have an opportunity to go back and change them. I feel that if I had this workshop prior to writing the lesson plans, I might have had more ammunition to propel me where I need to be, because I've spent the majority of my time spinning my wheels on my central focus.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm sure other folks are feeling that way too. You know, like if I had a sense of the big picture, I would have done things a little bit differently in this first month. But I also, want to say that the edTPA is just one piece of your training, and all of this work that you've done already in student teaching, that is benefiting you beyond, the certification of I've got to pass the edTPA exam. And so while, you and me as big picture thinkers, I tend to be wired that way too, I agree it's frustrating to be like, oh, I had this larger goal, and if I had known that, I would have done things differently. But I know there are others in the room who are not necessarily big picture thinkers, and if I would have said to you a month ago, give me a central focus, you would have been like, but I haven't even been in the classroom yet. I don't know. I've never worked with an Oreographic organizer before. I don't know what a Venn diagram is. I hope you know what a Venn diagram is. But it's this balance of how much of this do I need to get the certification requirement, and how much of this do I need just as gaining experience in the classroom, working with students, working with cooperating teachers, figuring out the school structure. So I say that to acknowledge your frustration, but also to say all is not lost. You still have benefited, and for those of you that, you said to me earlier, they're into these things called tree diagrams. A month ago, you might not have known what a tree diagram was, let alone be able to identify it as a tool for teaching. Or if you had never read Persepolis, a month ago you might not be able to identify that particular text as a tool for teaching. So you can go back and think about, well, maybe I didn't have articulated what my central focus was in the past month, but I do know that these are the tools that I've been using, and those tools must, be working towards a larger goal, and that goal must be working towards a central focus. And you're absolutely right. You have the opportunity and the power to go back and make changes. And you know what? That's what being a teacher is. It's always revising. It's like being a writer. You always revise. There's always a way to do it better. There's always a kid that needs it in a different way. So this going back and making changes and revising and looking at your tools and coming up with new tools, that's what you're signing up for. So while I agree, there's some frustration to this edTPA exam, which is like an institutional thing, I think it definitely is preparing you to get in the headspace of being a reflective practitioner.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Anybody totally panicked? Not anymore? Well, I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so let's move into wrap-up mode. Okay, we've talked about three things: organization, argumentation, analysis. The edTPA asks you to do these three things simultaneously. And they are complementary, right? We've seen that in the examples that we've worked with. But the good news is that you already have these skills, right? You know what an argument is. You've written tons of paragraphs, and you know now that technical definition of analysis, breaking the whole down into its component parts and evaluating, interpreting, assessing those parts. So you have got the skills to do this. Remove the pressure from yourself that this is an institutional state thing. This is just writing. You all are good writers. It's the same skill set. You've got them. You also know now that it's probably a little bit more simple than you were thinking. You know, you're going to do way more in your student teaching semester than you're going to write about in your edTPA. You got to keep it really focused on what those prompts are asking you for. We have only focused on the very beginning of task 1. We've spent 2 hours on the first 2 questions of task 1, and I can imagine that some of you are thinking, oh my goodness, like we've spent 2 hours on the first 2 questions, like it's going to take me forever to work through this. But the reason that I've taken so much time in the very beginning is because these are the same skills that you will use over and over and over and over again when you are writing this thing. You're going to always come back to analysis, right? Again, they know what the answer is. The answer is I'm an effective teacher. What they don't know is how you're an effective teacher. And that how has to come through in your analysis. So you're going to be doing that same move. These are the same moves that you're going to be making throughout the whole thing, and you have the skills now. You've had some practice with them now. So all you have to do is remember to not panic, stay focused on these 3 things, and you're going to have a successful portfolio at the end of the day, at the end of the semester. If you find yourself panicking in another 2 weeks, come to the Writing Center. We talk about these sorts of things daily. For those of you that I was able to check in with one-on-one, and I said, well, talk me through it. What are your tools? What are your lessons? Why do you think that's important? Those are the kind of conversations that we have daily in the Writing Center. And somebody like Courtney, who has passed the edTPA, can sit down and work with you for an hour and help you brainstorm and be sure that your logic is correct. So make an appointment with us. You can do it 2 ways. Visit our website, msmc.edu/writing center, and there's a giant make an appointment button. You can click there. If you go to the Mount portal, there's also a Writing Center page. You can click there, and then again, there's another link to make an appointment. So absolutely take advantage of our services. We would be happy to meet with you. I know you all are working during the day. We are open until 8 o'clock, Monday through Thursday, so you can get over here after school, and there's some availability for you to come and meet with us. We're happy to work with you. I would also say, don't wait until you've got all 30 pages together before you come in. Come in now with this organizational chart and say, can you just help me be sure I have a good central focus, because that's the foundation for everything else that's coming later. So start there, come early, let us help you plan it out, be sure you've got all of your ducks in a row, and then you can come back with a couple of paragraphs and start really looking at the pros of the writing. Any questions? You're welcome. You are welcome.